start whenever, right? All right. Violent video games are a threat to society as we know it, impacting our education and actions as well as increasing violence in our communities. We believe that violent video games should have restrictions so that people of all ages can live in peace and prosperity. Playing violent video games leads to aggression in people, resulting in unneeded violence and distrust in society. Violent video games are a distraction for education and can impact students' ability to learn as well as how they talk and act during their lives. Lack of maturity when playing violent video games can lead to poor decisions and lead people to fall under bad influence as well. Our first argument is that playing violent video games increases aggression in people and affects the way they think, talk, and act. The Greenhaven Press, part of the organization Gale, states in the book Violent Video Games that researchers found that more days in a row students played violent video games, they expressed less empathy and were more likely to demonstrate aggression in a laboratory setting. This information is proof that people who play violent video games too often experience a greater change in attitudes and behavior, and not for the better. A true story from the book Video Games, Violence, and Crime. Nathan Brooks, a student at about 10 o'clock at night, grabbed a gun from within his house and shot both his mother and father. Thankfully, they both survived their wounds and were able to call 911. Brooks denied it at first, but then it became clear that he was the one who was responsible for this dire act. He blamed violent video games he played caused him to do the things he had done. Playing violent video games increases aggression, which leads to conflicts in behavior in society. However, restrictions to violent video games can help people be less aggressive so that conflicts can be avoided and we can all live in a civilized manner of peace and happiness.
Our next argument is that when there is no restrictions on violent video games, students are distracted from their education. What happens when your child doesn't get a good education? They won't be as smart as they could be. They won't be able to support their families like they should be able to. We absolutely do not need distractions from children's education. We don't need violent video games. We need restrictions. A study in November of 2013 at the University of Missouri-Columbia found that boys between the ages of 8 and 17 have difficulty falling asleep if they have been playing video games before their bedtime. Students cannot focus on their education if they don't get a good night's sleep. They need their full hours of sleep in order to reach their maximum potential. Also, child sleep psychologist Michael Gradisar says, for adolescents in their final years of school who are reviewing for exams, winding down at night with a video game might not be the best idea. In order to stay on task and in order to function properly during school, students need their sleep. Our last argument why violent video games should have restrictions is that young people lack the maturity to play violent video games, and they cannot handle the violence appropriately. In September of 2013, Aaron Alexis was the gunman in the shooting, killing 13 people. His friends say that Aaron played 16 hours of violent video games a day. His friends also said that violent video games explained his actions. Now, put yourself in the shoes of the families that had a family member die that day in September of 2013. Imagine the sadness they felt. It could have been prevented. This shooting was because of violent video games. And since 2013, we still haven't learned our lesson. History will repeat itself, unless we put a restriction on violent video games. According to Gale, an online website, they state that it is scary for a parent to watch as their child is shooting people on a screen. There are better things a child could be doing. Gale also says that children playing these games experience an increase in aggressive thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and good and helpful behaviors decrease. We should be encouraging kids to stop playing violent video games to prevent them from getting aggressive and violent. We need restrictions on these games. We want children to be as good of a person as they can possibly be and to live good lives. Violent video games simply prevent this from happening.
They teach you survival. They let you blow your anger out on them. They can be part of you and your life. I'm talking about the most awesome thing you do on your console. I'm talking about video games. There should not be a restriction on violent video games to reduce violence. How many people do you know play violent video games yet don't kill people or commit crimes? It helps us boys let our anger out, anger and problems disappear. They all can be considered violent and yet helpful. Lastly, and more importantly, think about the kids and how they will react if we ban all these violent video games. Our first argument is, in 2010, researchers presented evidence at the American Pain Society's annual scientific meeting that video games have proven effective in reducing anxiety or pain. 61.9% of boys play video games because it helps them relax. 47.8% of boys play video games because it helps them forget problems, and 45.4% of boys play video games because it helps them get anger out. This shows why boys play violent video games and how violent video games can help you.
Secondly, violent video games should not be banned because most of them can be considered violent. Depends on your meaning of violence. Violence, according to the dictionary, is an intended physical force and/or strong emotion, like music. In Assassin's Creed games, they include inappropriate scenes and language, but they're also really helpful. They help you with dyslexia, laser, and more. While games like Mario are, yes, less violent, but still include violence when you're running around beating up bros. There should be no restriction on violent video games because if you ban violence, you ban lots of other games out there. Lastly, and more importantly, think about the kids. How will they react if we ban these helpful yet also violent video games? It's the 20th century. Most of us are playing games on our phone, doing something with technology. Think about this. You have children, and they're most likely playing video games for most of their free time. Over 90% of children play video games. And something interesting, 85% of those video games contain some sort of violence. They might not know it, but violent video games actually are helpful. They help reduce anxiety and lessen stress and fear. Taking that away will most likely cause your children to turn crazy, restless. Some violent video games help us mentally and emotionally. Sometimes it's used to treat depression, and 44% of people recover immediately. Taking that away might cause more anxiety, stress, and fear. Violent video games should not be banned because they help reduce the world's stress and anxiety, which is a growing problem in the United States.
All right, both teams have 2 minutes to prep for rebuttals. for rebuttal.
A great number of people in our society use video games today. That is a fact. However, not all video games are violent that we use today. Even if they are violent, that doesn't mean they can't stop playing violent video games. The reason for these restrictions is just limiting the time and place when and where you can't play violent video games. These restrictions need to be enforced so that they can help prevent unnecessary risks that might happen in society and to societies elsewhere as well. Video games are used for entertainment, but using violence in them must be kept in check so we can protect the balance and order of the current state of the world.
My opponent may say that if we put a restriction on violent video games, the world will not be so violent. But even if we can't purchase violent video games, that doesn't mean our parents can't. The restriction that we decided is on the resolved claim said about 18 or 21 years to purchase. But what I know that parents are older than that and they can purchase. My opponent also said time is your choice. I would like to agree with that because they said that the person who shot his parents played 16 hours of video games. Well, he chose to play that much. Not all of us play that much. When I play violent video games, I play about for 30 minutes and then I stop. I would like to ask the teachers, how many of you actually allowed to play video games during class? So how can then violent video games be a problem and can cause violence and disturb the education?
Closing?
We believe that there should be restrictions on violent video games so that our world is a more peaceful place to live. There needs to be restrictions because violent video games causes an increase in aggression. Someone who is aggressive may scare off others if they show signs of aggression. Also, young people lack the maturity to play violent video games. Young people's potential could be crushed because of these violent games. And lastly, violent video games also distract the focus of students on their education. If they aren't getting the education they need in this world, it could greatly impact their future. Think of two different societies. The people a part of one society are violent, uneducated, and unhappy. The society has no restrictions on violent video games. But the people a part of the other society are educated, focused, and relatively happy. This society has restrictions on violent video games. Which society would you rather be a part of?
Restriction on violent video games is not necessary. Violent video games help kids with dyslexia read better, and they help with depression, which is a common problem here in the United States of America. On another note, it helps by relieving their stress and anger. I don't know about you, but after a long, stressful day, I like sitting down and playing some video games myself. Also, all video games have their own amount of violence in it. Even some more than others, but all of them do. So if you're going to put a restriction on violent video games, you're putting the restriction on most of the video games we play today. Like we stated earlier, 90% of children play video games. Most importantly, 85% of those 90% play violent video games. Even if you don't think it's a violent video game, it probably still has some violence and can cause violence in a child's mind. Even my opponent here plays a violent video game in which you kill every dangerous creature that's found in your path. I don't think he would like to stop playing that game. This is 21st century. Video games and technology are the future of this world we live on. They are a part of us and the technology we use every day. Do you want to be the one who takes that away from us?
Alright, a round of applause for both groups.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true.
Alright, while the judges deliberate, let's hear some compliments for both groups. Yes, sir.
I like how Antonio addressed the other team.
Yes, he did. Even look at them. I'd be scared about it. They're so sad. Yes, they did. Henry.
There's a lot of eye contact from both sides.
A lot of it. I'm very proud. I can tell you guys correct. Thanks.
On the affirmative side, their argument sounded very like educated.
Nice. Yes. Haley. It was very enunciated. I mean, you had to. How could you not pay attention to that? No. Yeah. Very powerful. Charlie? Great job.